Emma, you wouldn't understand the value of these things anyway. You were never really mom's jewelry type. My sister Vanessa said those words while standing in our dead mother's bedroom, surrounded by velvet jewelry boxes and estate documents spread across the bed like a treasure map. Her manicured fingers moved through diamond necklaces and heirloom rings, with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never questioned whether she deserved them. My father stood near the window, silent and complicit, his arms crossed over his chest, in that way that meant the decision was already made, and I shouldn't bother arguing. I watched from the doorway. Invisible. Dismissed. Again. My name is Emma Bell. I'm 32 years old, a freelance graphic designer working from a small apartment in Portland, Oregon. And in that moment, standing in my dead mother's bedroom, I realized I'd spent my entire life being the daughter who didn't quite matter. Vanessa is 3 years older than me, 35, married to a successful attorney, living in the family's affluent suburb with their 8-year-old daughter in a house that looks like it belongs in a magazine. She's always been perfectly presented, perfectly positioned, perfectly favored. Our father, Richard, is 68 now, a retired corporate executive who built his identity on control and conventional success. He's always valued Vanessa's traditional path over my creative independence, always made it clear through 1,000 small choices that she was the daughter who got it right. Our mother, Catherine, passed away 3 weeks ago from cancer. The funeral was tasteful and well attended, full of people who knew the version of our family we showed the world. Now we were dividing her estate, and the pattern of my entire life was playing out one final time. I moved to Portland at 24, partly for work, but mostly to escape the suffocating dynamic of being the lesser daughter. I came back for the funeral and stayed to help with estate matters, hoping somewhere in the back of my mind that maybe this would be different. Maybe in death, my mother would finally see me. Maybe there would be some acknowledgement, some recognition that I mattered too. I was wrong. My father cleared his throat and pulled out a folder of documents. His voice had that businesslike efficiency he used in boardrooms, the tone that meant emotions weren't welcome here. Vanessa will receive the jewelry collection, which has been appraised at approximately $200,000. She'll also receive the vacation home in Napa Valley and half of the liquid assets. He glanced at me briefly, then back to his papers. Emma, you'll receive your mother's photo albums, her book collection, and a cash inheritance of $25,000. The numbers hung in the air. Vanessa was getting nearly $1 million in assets. I was getting photo albums and enough money to cover a few months of rent. I found my voice, though it came out quieter than I wanted. That seems significantly unequal. My father's expression didn't change. Your sister has a family to provide for, Emma. You've always been more independent. Your mother wanted to make sure Vanessa was secure. He said it without malice, which somehow made it worse, like it was simply a fact of nature that Vanessa deserved more. Vanessa looked up from a pearl necklace she was examining, her face arranged in what she probably thought was sympathy. Memories are more valuable than material things anyway, right? At least you got something meaningful. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she was being generous by not feeling guilty about taking everything. I stood there feeling the familiar weight of being dismissed, of being told my hurt wasn't valid, of being expected to smile and accept whatever scraps I was given. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand fairness. I wanted to ask my father when exactly he decided that one daughter mattered more than the other. But I didn't say any of those things. I just nodded and started gathering the photo albums stacked on the floor beside the bed. That's when I noticed it. Tucked inside one of the albums, barely visible, was a small yellowed envelope. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting, the letters careful and deliberate. I pulled it out slowly, my heart suddenly beating faster. Vanessa was too busy cataloging her inheritance to notice. My father had already moved on to discussing tax implications with her. I held the envelope in my hands, feeling its weight. Something inside me shifted. This wasn't just a forgotten note or a sentimental letter. My mother had hidden this here deliberately, had placed it where only I would find it. I gathered the rest of the albums, holding them against my chest like a shield. "I'll take these home and go through them," I said, my voice steady now. Neither of them really looked at me. Vanessa was already taking photos of jewelry pieces, probably planning which ones to wear to upcoming events. My father was making notes about estate paperwork. I walked out of that house carrying boxes of photo albums that everyone assumed were worthless. The envelope burned in my pocket like a secret waiting to detonate. I loaded everything into my car and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the house where I grew up, the house where I'd spent 32 years learning I wasn't quite enough. I pulled out the envelope and held it up to the light. I couldn't see through it, couldn't tell what was inside. But my mother's handwriting on the front looked purposeful, almost urgent. I wanted to tear it open right there, but something made me wait. This moment felt important, like whatever was inside would change something fundamental. I started the car and drove back to my rental apartment, the envelope sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The whole drive, I kept glancing at it, wondering what my mother had left me that she couldn't say while she was alive. Wondering if maybe, just maybe, she'd seen me after all. The apartment was quiet when I got back. I set the boxes of photo albums on the floor and made myself sit down at the kitchen table before opening the envelope. My hands were shaking slightly as I carefully tore the seal. Inside was a letter, 4 pages handwritten on my mother's personal stationery. The date at the top was from 2 months before she died. I recognized her handwriting immediately, the careful loops and precise spacing. This wasn't written in a morphine haze or during a moment of confusion. This was deliberate. "My dearest Emma," it began. "If you're reading this, then the estate has been divided exactly as I knew it would be. Your father structured the inheritance according to his preferences, and I allowed it because fighting him in my final months felt pointless. But I need you to know something. I'm giving you something Vanessa could never appreciate, something that matters more than jewelry or vacation homes. I'm giving you the truth and the power to decide what to do with it." My breath caught. I kept reading. 28 years ago, when you were 4 years old and Vanessa was 7, your father had an affair with his secretary. Her name was Jennifer. It lasted nearly 2 years. I discovered it by accident, found hotel receipts in his car, saw them together at a restaurant when he was supposed to be working late. I confronted him and he begged me to stay, promised it was over, said he'd do anything to keep the family together. I had to stop reading for a moment. My hands were trembling now, not from nerves, but from something else. Shock, vindication, a strange sense that everything I'd felt my whole life was finally making sense. I kept going. I stayed, Emma, not because I forgave him, but because I was afraid. Afraid of being a divorced woman, afraid of losing financial security, afraid of what people would think. I made a choice to preserve the appearance of our family at the cost of my own happiness and dignity. But I wasn't stupid. I kept evidence. Letters, photographs, bank statements showing payments for a secret apartment he kept for her. Everything carefully documented and hidden where your father would never find it. My mother's words continued, explaining that she never used the information because she believed keeping the family intact was more important. But now, at the end of her life, she was leaving it to me. "You were always the one who valued honesty over appearance, even when it cost you," she wrote. "You were the daughter who saw through pretense, who asked uncomfortable questions, who refused to perform happiness when you didn't feel it. That's why I'm trusting you with this." The letter included detailed instructions. There was a safety deposit box at a bank across town, registered under her maiden name. The key was taped to the back of a specific photograph in one of the albums, a family portrait from 1997. The box contained all the evidence she'd collected. "I don't know what you'll do with this information," she wrote. "Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I wanted you to have choices, Emma. I wanted you to have power. I spent my life feeling powerless, and I don't want that for you. Whatever you decide, know that I saw you. I always saw you. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to show it more clearly while I was alive." The letter was signed simply, Mom. I sat there for a long time, the pages spread out on the table in front of me. 28 years ago. I would have been 4. I tried to remember that time, but the memories were hazy. I recalled my father being gone a lot, my mother seeming sad and distant. I remembered Vanessa getting most of the attention, being the one who made everyone smile. I remembered feeling like I was somehow in the way, like my presence made things harder instead of better. Now I understood why. My mother had discovered my father's betrayal during those years, and instead of leaving, she'd stayed and slowly withdrawn. She'd protected herself the only way she knew how, by documenting everything and keeping her emotions locked away. And Vanessa, being older and more eager to please, had become my father's favorite because she didn't remind him of his guilt. While I, perceptive even as a child, had sensed something was wrong and pulled away, which made me the daughter who was harder to love. The pattern had started then and never stopped. I got up and found the photo albums, searching through them until I located the 1997 family portrait. We all looked happy in it. My father's arm around my mother's shoulders, Vanessa grinning at the camera, me sitting in front looking serious and small. Behind the photograph, taped carefully to the backing, was a small silver key. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight. This key represented something more than just access to a safety deposit box. It represented my mother's final gift to me, not jewelry or property, but truth and agency, the power to decide what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of justice I wanted to seek. I thought about Vanessa's condescending tone earlier. Memories are more valuable than material things anyway. She'd said it like she was comforting me, like she was being kind by not acknowledging the massive inequality. She had no idea that the memories my mother left me included evidence that could shatter the perfect family image she'd built her entire identity around. I thought about my father's dismissive explanation. Your sister has a family to provide for. As if my life, my needs, my future didn't matter as much. As if the favoritism that had shaped my entire childhood was justified by some practical calculation about who deserved more. They were probably celebrating right now. Vanessa was probably already planning what to do with her inheritance, maybe posting subtle photos of the jewelry on social media, with captions about honoring our mother's memory. My father was probably relieved that the estate was settled without conflict, without me making a scene or demanding fairness. They thought I'd gotten nothing. They thought I was the daughter who'd been given the short end one final time and would accept it quietly, the way I always had. They had no idea what my mother had actually left me. I made a decision. Tomorrow I would go to the bank and open that safety deposit box. Not because I knew what I'd do with the evidence, but because I needed to see it. I needed to hold proof that my family's perfect image was a lie, that my father's authority was built on betrayal, that my mother had been strong in ways no one recognized. I needed to know that I wasn't crazy for feeling overlooked all these years. I needed validation that the pain was real and justified. And then I decide what kind of daughter I wanted to be. The one who kept quiet to preserve peace, or the one who finally demanded to be seen. I sat there in that cold bank room, surrounded by my family's secrets, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. For anyone who's ever felt invisible in their own family, who's ever wondered if they were the problem, maybe you understand why I couldn't just walk away from this. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been the overlooked one, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe. Because what I found in that box, what my mother left me, changed everything. And I think you'll want to see what happened next. The next morning, I drove to the bank my mother had specified in her letter. It was a small branch in a neighborhood I didn't usually visit, which probably explained how she'd kept it secret for so long. I brought the key and identification, my hands steady now that I'd made the decision to see this through. The bank employee was professional and efficient, asking no questions about why I was accessing a box registered under my mother's maiden name. She led me to a private viewing room and brought out a long metal box, setting it on the table in front of me. "Take your time," she said, and left me alone. I stared at the box for a moment before opening it. Whatever was inside would change how I saw my family, how I understood my past. There was no going back from this knowledge. I lifted the lid. Inside were 4 manila folders, each labeled in my mother's precise handwriting. The first folder was marked Richard, 1996, 1998. I opened it and found exactly what she'd promised. Hotel receipts with dates and times, love letters on corporate stationery, signed by someone named Jennifer, photographs of my father with a woman who looked young, probably mid-20s, caught in intimate moments at restaurants and parks, bank statements showing regular payments to an apartment lease in downtown Seattle, nowhere near where we lived. The evidence was meticulous and damning. My mother had documented everything with the precision of someone building a legal case. Dates, times, amounts. Everything you'd need to prove infidelity in a divorce proceeding. But she'd never used it. She'd kept it locked away for nearly 3 decades. I set that folder aside and opened the second one, labeled Financial, 1998-2015. Inside were documents showing something I hadn't expected. My father had systematically moved marital assets into accounts under his name only, starting around the time of the affair and continuing for years. Investment accounts, property deeds, even the family business shares, all gradually transferred or restructured to minimize what would be considered joint marital property. He'd essentially embezzled from his own marriage, protecting his wealth in case my mother ever decided to leave. The paperwork showed a pattern of financial manipulation that left my mother with far less independent security than anyone realized. The third folder was labeled Estate Planning 2019. Inside were email exchanges between my father and Vanessa from 5 years ago, when my mother's cancer was first diagnosed. They discussed how to structure the estate to maximize tax efficiency. But reading between the lines, it was clear they were planning how to minimize what I would receive. Vanessa had actually suggested that I didn't need as much because I was single and without dependents, as if that made me less deserving of my own mother's legacy. My father had agreed, saying I'd always been more independent and wouldn't miss what I didn't know existed. They'd been planning this for years. The unequal inheritance wasn't a recent decision or a simple oversight. It was a deliberate strategy, discussed and refined while my mother was dying. I felt sick reading it, but I kept going because there was one more folder. This one was simply labeled EMA. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents related to a property, a commercial building in downtown Portland. The deed was in my mother's name only, purchased 20 years ago using money from her parents' estate. I recognized the address. It was a well-maintained building in a good location, the kind that would be worth significant money. There were lease agreements showing 3 successful businesses renting space there, all with long-term contracts, tax records, property management company reports, and a letter from my mother explaining everything. "This building is yours, Emma," she wrote. "I bought it 20 years ago as my insurance policy, my escape fund, if I ever found the courage to leave your father." I never did leave, but I kept the property, and the income went into a separate account that Richard never knew about. The building is worth approximately $1.8 million, and it generates $12,000 in monthly rental income. I had to read that sentence 3 times before it sank in. $1.8 million, $12,000 per month. My mother had secretly owned a commercial property for 2 decades, building wealth that my father knew nothing about, and she'd left it to me. The letter continued. The property transfers to you directly through the will. It's been in my name only, separate from any marital assets. Your father doesn't know it exists. Neither does Vanessa. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more during my life, but I can give you this now: independence, security, and the choice of what to do with everything else I've left you. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what I was seeing. My mother wasn't just a passive victim of my father's betrayal and favoritism. She was a woman who'd quietly built her own power while appearing to go along with everything. She'd played a long game, protecting herself in the only ways available to her, and in the end, she'd chosen to empower the daughter who needed it most. She'd seen me, she'd understood my worth, and she'd left me not just wealth, but agency. The tears came then, not from sadness, but from being finally, truly seen by the parent I thought had overlooked me. My mother had watched me struggle with being the lesser daughter for 32 years, and she'd been building something for me the whole time, something that would give me the power to never feel powerless again. I spent the next several hours in that viewing room, going through every document, making notes, taking photos with my phone. I needed to understand the full scope of what I'd inherited, both the property and the evidence. By the time I left the bank, I understood several things clearly. First, my mother had been far more strategic than anyone gave her credit for. She'd documented my father's betrayal not out of vindictiveness, but out of self-protection. She'd built financial independence not because she planned to use it, but because she needed to know she could survive if she had to. Second, my father and Vanessa had been actively planning to minimize my inheritance for years, discussing it behind my back while presenting themselves as the loving family members who were just following my mother's wishes. Third, I now owned property worth 6 times what Vanessa had received in jewelry. I had monthly income that exceeded what most people earned in salaries. I had financial security and independence that my father had spent decades trying to deny my mother. And fourth, I had evidence that could destroy my father's reputation and shatter Vanessa's perfect family image if I chose to use it. The question was, what kind of person did I want to be? I drove home slowly, my mind racing through possibilities. I could simply take the property, say nothing about the evidence, and walk away wealthy and free. That would be the clean choice, the one that required no confrontation or revenge. Or I could use the evidence to expose everything: the affair, the financial manipulation, the years of deliberate favoritism. I could make them see what they'd done, force them to acknowledge the injustice. But what would that accomplish? Would it heal anything or just create more pain? I thought about my mother's letter, her careful words about giving me the power to choose. She hadn't told me what to do with the evidence. She'd just given me options, agency, control over my own story. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the revenge wasn't in exposing them, but in having the power to expose them and choosing my own path instead of reacting to theirs. I was still thinking about this when my phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello? Emma! Her voice was bright, excited. I just got back from having the jewelry appraised. You won't believe this, but the collection is worth even more than we thought. Almost $300,000. I'm thinking about selling some of the pieces I won't wear and putting the money into Madison's college fund. Isn't that amazing? I listened to her chatter on about her windfall, about her plans, about how grateful she was to Mom for leaving her such a meaningful inheritance. She didn't ask how I was doing or what I planned to do with my photo albums. She didn't acknowledge the inequality or show any awareness that maybe, just maybe, the distribution had been unfair. Finally, she paused and said, almost as an afterthought, "How are you doing with your photo albums? I hope you're finding comfort in the memories at least." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. The assumption that I'd received exactly what I deserved, that I should be grateful for scraps while she celebrated her treasure. I looked down at the documents spread across my dining table. the deed to a building worth $1.8 million, the evidence of our father's betrayal, the proof that our family's perfect image was built on lies. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Actually, Vanessa, I said, my voice calm and clear, I'm finding the memories very valuable, more valuable than you could possibly imagine. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly taking control of my inheritance. I met with the property management company in person, introducing myself as the new owner and reviewing all the tenant agreements and maintenance records. The building was well maintained and profitable, exactly as my mother's documents had indicated. The tenants were established businesses with solid lease agreements, and the property manager was competent and professional. I opened a new bank account specifically for the rental income, keeping it completely separate from my other finances. I also scheduled meetings with an attorney who specialized in estate law and real property, someone who could ensure everything was legally airtight and that there was no way for my father or Vanessa to contest the transfer. The attorney, James Chen, was in his 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense approach. He reviewed all of my mother's documents carefully, then looked up at me with something like respect. "Your mother was very thorough," he said. "The property was purchased entirely with her separate inheritance, maintained in her name only, and specifically bequeathed to you in the will. It's completely separate from the estate your father administered. Legally, this is airtight. No one can challenge it." "What about the other documents?" I asked, gesturing to the folders containing the affair evidence and financial manipulation records. James examined them carefully, his expression neutral. "The affair evidence is old but documented. The financial manipulation is more complex. Technically, moving assets between accounts isn't illegal in a marriage, but the pattern here shows clear intent to hide wealth from a spouse. If your mother had filed for divorce, this would have been powerful evidence in a settlement. As it stands now, the statute of limitations has passed for any civil action, but the documents still prove a pattern of deception." "So they're essentially insurance," I said. "Exactly. They can't be used in court at this point, but they could be used for other purposes." He looked at me carefully. "May I ask what you're planning to do with all of this?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Right now, I'm just making sure I understand what I have." "That's wise," he said. "Take your time. Make sure any decisions you make are strategic, not emotional." I left his office feeling more grounded. I had power now, but I also had options. I didn't have to rush into any decisions about confrontation or exposure. I could simply build my life with the resources my mother had left me and let them continue believing I'd received almost nothing. During those 2 weeks, I maintained minimal contact with my family. I saw Vanessa's social media posts showing off pieces of our mother's jewelry at various events, always with captions about honoring mom's memory and cherishing family heirlooms. She looked happy, confident, completely unburdened by any sense that the inheritance division had been unfair. My father had apparently returned to his normal routine. Through a mutual acquaintance, I heard he'd joined a golf club and was spending his days in comfortable retirement, seemingly untroubled by grief or guilt. The casual way they'd moved on, the complete absence of any acknowledgement that maybe I deserved more, crystallized something inside me. They genuinely believed they'd done nothing wrong. They believed the favoritism was justified, that Vanessa deserved more because she had a family, that I should be grateful for whatever I received. They had no idea that I was now wealthier than both of them combined. The turning point came when my father called. I was working on a design project when his name appeared on my phone screen. I considered not answering, but curiosity won. "Ema," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of paternal authority. "I wanted to check in with you, see how you're doing with everything." "I'm fine," I said carefully. "Good, good." There was a pause, and I could hear him settling into whatever he'd actually called to say. "I've been thinking about your financial situation, and I wanted to offer some advice. Have you considered moving back to this area? Portland is expensive, and with your freelance work, it might be difficult to maintain stability. I felt my jaw tighten. Here it was again, the assumption that I was struggling, that I needed his guidance, that I hadn't figured out how to build a life for myself. I could help you find something more stable, he continued. I still have connections in the corporate world. We could find you a position with benefits, regular income, something more secure than freelancing. The subtext was clear. He viewed me as the daughter who needed rescue, who hadn't quite figured life out, who should be grateful for his help and guidance. He had no idea that I owned property generating more monthly income than most corporate salaries. He couldn't conceive that I might be doing better than he assumed. That's not necessary, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm doing well with my current work. Are you sure? Because I know things can be tight for freelancers, and I'd hate for you to struggle when there are better options available. I looked around my apartment at the property deed framed on my wall, at the financial statements spread across my desk, at the evidence of my father's betrayals sitting in a folder on my bookshelf. I'm sure, I said, but thank you for the concern. After we hung up, I sat with my reaction. My father's condescension, his complete blindness to my actual capabilities and worth, was never going to change through explanation or confrontation. He would always see me as less than because that's how he needed to see me, to justify his favoritism and his choices. The same was true for Vanessa. No amount of arguing or presenting evidence would make them suddenly recognize my value or regret how they treated me. I didn't need their recognition anymore. I didn't need to make them understand or apologize. What I needed was to live my life on my own terms, with my own power, and let them discover the truth in their own time and their own way. A plan began forming in my mind. I wouldn't reveal the property immediately. I'd let them continue believing I'd received almost nothing, that I was the struggling freelancer who got the short end of the inheritance. I'd maintain minimal contact, respond politely but distantly to their occasional check-ins, and quietly build my life with the resources my mother left me. Because eventually, the truth would come out. Through estate taxes, through property records, through the simple passage of time. And when it did, when they discovered what I'd had all along, their own assumptions and condescension would be the source of their humiliation, not anything I had to actively do. My mother had played the long game, building power in secret while appearing to go along with everything. I'd inherited more than her property. I'd inherited her. Inherited strategy. I was still thinking about this when an email arrived from Vanessa. The subject line read, Memorial Service Planning. I opened it and found a forwarded email chain about planning a more formal memorial service for our mother. Something public with extended family and friends. Vanessa had taken charge of organizing it naturally, and the email included a list of tasks she was assigning to various family members. My task was at the bottom. Ema, can you create a slideshow of family photos? Since that's what you got from the estate anyway, might as well put them to use. We'll need about 10-15 minutes of photo set to music. Thanks. I stared at the email for a long time. Even in honoring our mother, Vanessa had found a way to be dismissive, to remind me that I'd received the lesser inheritance, to frame my contribution as making use of my consolation prize. I looked at the property deed on my wall, then back at the email. I replied with a single word, sure. And I began planning exactly what kind of slideshow I would create. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked on the memorial slideshow with meticulous care. I went through every photo album my mother had left me, scanning hundreds of images that spanned decades of family history. But I wasn't just creating a sentimental tribute. I was crafting a narrative. I included photos from the late 1990s, carefully selecting images that showed the family dynamic during the affair years. There were pictures of my father conspicuously absent from birthday parties and holidays, photos where my mother looked tired and sad, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Images of young Vanessa always at the center of attention, while 4-year-old me sat alone in corners and backgrounds, overlooked and small. I didn't manipulate anything or add captions that spelled out the story. I just arranged the photos chronologically, letting the sequence speak for itself. For anyone paying attention, the pattern would be clear. The memorial service took place at an upscale event venue Vanessa had selected. She'd organized everything perfectly: catering, flowers, a program printed on expensive paper. About 80 people attended: family, friends, my father's former colleagues, members of my mother's book club and charity organizations. Vanessa looked stunning in an elegant black dress, wearing our mother's pearl necklace. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting condolences, playing the role of devoted daughter with ease. My father stood beside her, dignified and composed, the picture of a man bearing his grief with strength. When I arrived, several people approached me with sympathetic expressions. "It's so brave of you to be here," one of my father's former colleagues said. "I know this must be especially difficult for you." The way he said it, with that particular tone of pity, made me realize that Vanessa had been shaping the narrative. She'd been telling people, subtly, that my mother and I weren't close, that I was the distant daughter who'd moved away and rarely visited. She was positioning herself as the one who'd really mattered, the one who'd really cared. I smiled politely and moved through the crowd, finding my seat near the back of the room. The service began with speeches and remembrances. Vanessa spoke about our mother's grace and elegance, about how she'd taught her the importance of family and tradition. My father spoke about Catherine's loyalty and dedication. Several friends shared stories about her kindness and quiet strength. No one mentioned that she'd spent 20 years secretly building financial independence from her husband. No one talked about the quiet sadness in her eyes or the way she'd learned to protect herself through documentation and strategic planning. Finally, it was time for the slideshow. The lights dimmed, and my presentation began on the large screen at the front of the room. It opened with beautiful photos of my mother in her youth, vibrant, smiling, full of life. Then family photos from the early years of marriage, showing genuine happiness. My father and mother laughing together, Vanessa as a baby, the promise of a perfect family. Then the sequence moved into the late 1990s. The shift was subtle at first, but as the slideshow continued, attentive viewers began to notice patterns. Photos of my father absent from family events, empty spaces where he should have been. Images of my mother looking increasingly strained, her posture more rigid, her smiles more forced. Young Vanessa always at the center, performing for the camera, while I faded into backgrounds and corners. I heard some guests shifting in their seats, beginning to read between the lines. Then came a photo I'd found tucked in the back of one album. My mother alone at my elementary school graduation. No father, no sister. Just Catherine sitting in the audience, smiling at the camera, but her eyes holding unmistakable sadness. The next image was a handwritten note from 6-year-old me. "Thank you for coming, Mommy. I know you're always there, even when everyone else forgets." The childish handwriting was barely readable on screen, but the sentiment was clear enough. Several guests made audible sounds of sympathy. I saw people glancing at my father with new understanding. The final sequence showed my mother alone in her garden during the last year of her life. She looked peaceful but solitary, a woman who'd found contentment in her own company after years of family dynamics that had failed her. The last image was the envelope my mother had left me, photographed but not opened on screen, just visible enough to show it existed, to prove that Catherine had left her daughter something more than photo albums. As the lights came up, the room was heavy with emotion and unspoken questions. Several of my mother's friends immediately approached me, tears in their eyes. "Your mother talked about you so much," one woman said, gripping my hands. "She was so proud of you, so proud of your independence and your strength." Another friend, Margaret, who'd known my mother for decades, hugged me tightly. She loved you very much, Emma. I hope you know that. These were women who'd clearly known the real story, who'd understood the family dynamic, who were now seeing me claim my place in the narrative. Vanessa appeared beside me, her smile tight and controlled. She waited until the other guests moved away, then leaned in close. "That was quite a presentation," she said through clenched teeth. "I didn't realize you had so many photos of yourself with Mom." The implication was clear. I was making myself seem more important than I was, rewriting history to center myself in a story where I'd been peripheral. But other guests were surrounding me now, asking about my life, sharing memories of my mother mentioning me, treating me with recognition and respect that I'd never received from my immediate family. My father stood apart, his face carefully controlled, but I noticed him leaving early, before the reception dinner began. He'd seen the timeline I'd presented. He'd recognized the photos from the affair period, and he was calculating whether I knew more than I'd revealed. I'd planted seeds of doubt and questions without saying a single accusatory word, simply by showing the truth of what was. As the reception wound down, Margaret pulled me aside. She was in her 70s, elegant and direct, someone who'd been my mother's friend since college. "Your mother told me she left you something important," Margaret said, her eyes knowing. "She said you'd know what to do with it when the time was right." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Margaret continued, "She also told me that if anyone ever questioned your inheritance or treated you as if you received less than you deserved, I should remind them that Catherine Bell was far more strategic than anyone gave her credit for." She squeezed my hand. She made sure the daughter who valued honesty got the truth, and the daughter who valued appearances got the jewelry. Margaret walked away, leaving me standing in the emptying venue, understanding that my mother had had allies, that people had known, that the truth was never as hidden as my father and sister believed. Standing there, I wondered how many other people knew the real story of my family, how many had watched the favoritism and stayed silent, how many had seen my mother's quiet strength and understood what she was really doing all those years. Sometimes I think the hardest part of being overlooked isn't the invisibility itself. It's discovering that others saw it happening and never said a word. What would you do if you realized your family's secrets weren't as secret as they thought? In the days following the memorial, I noticed a shift in how extended family and family friends interacted with me. Several people reached out directly, sending messages that acknowledged the subtext of the slideshow without explicitly stating it. My mother's book club friends invited me to lunch. Her sister, Aunt Linda, who lived in California and had never been close to my father, called for a long conversation. "I always thought you got a raw deal in that family," Linda said bluntly. "Catherine knew it too. She talked about it sometimes, about how Richard favored Vanessa, and how hard that must have been for you." These conversations felt validating, but also bittersweet. I realized that many people had seen the truth, but felt powerless or unwilling to intervene. Family dynamics are complicated, and outsiders rarely feel entitled to interfere, even when they witness injustice. 3 days after the memorial, I received a text from Vanessa. "We need to talk about that slideshow. You made Dad look bad in front of his friends and colleagues. Mom wouldn't have wanted that." I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit, understanding that Vanessa was feeling defensive because the carefully constructed narrative of our perfect family had been questioned. The power dynamic had shifted, and she sensed it even if she didn't fully understand why. More telling than Vanessa's text was my father's complete silence. He didn't call, didn't send messages, didn't acknowledge the memorial or the slideshow at all. I recognized this pattern from childhood. His way of dealing with uncomfortable truths was to ignore them entirely, to act as if nothing had happened until everyone else moved on. But this time felt different. I suspected he'd recognized some of the photos from the affair period, that he'd understood the timeline I was presenting, and that he was calculating whether I knew more than I'd revealed. I'd created uncertainty without making any direct accusations, and that uncertainty was its own kind of power. While my family processed the memorial, I focused on building my new reality. I used some of the property income to upgrade my home office, investing in better equipment for my design work. I hired a financial advisor who specialized in real estate investment, someone who could help me manage my wealth strategically. The advisor's name was Patricia, a woman in her 50s with decades of experience. She reviewed my situation and nodded approvingly. "Your mother set you up very well," she said. "The commercial property is excellent. Stable tenants, good location, steady income. You're in a position most people spend their entire lives working toward." "I'm still getting used to it," I admitted. "That's normal," Patricia said. "But you should start thinking about growth. You have the income and the credit now to expand your portfolio if you want to." She presented an opportunity, a small residential building with 4 units that had just come on the market. The asking price was $650,000, which I could cover with a combination of my cash inheritance and a small mortgage backed by my existing property income. "Real estate in Portland continues to appreciate," Patricia explained. "Rental properties provide both income and long-term wealth building. This would diversify your holdings and increase your monthly cash flow." I realized I was in a position to make investment decisions that would set me up for life, to build the kind of financial security my father had always claimed to value, but never actually provided for me. As I considered this investment, I also thought about the evidence still sitting in my safety deposit box, the proof of my father's affair and financial manipulation. I hadn't decided what to do with it, if anything. Part of me wanted to simply let it remain buried, to take the high road and build my life without needing revenge or confrontation. But another part of me recognized that my father and Vanessa still believed I was the lesser daughter, that they'd learned nothing from the memorial service, that they'd continue their pattern of dismissal and condescension unless something forced them to see the truth. I was still weighing these options when I received an unexpected email from Vanessa. The subject line read, "Family meeting required." I opened it with a sense of foreboding. "Ema," the email began. "Dad has decided to sell the family home. He's received an excellent offer and wants to accept it quickly. I've already agreed, and we need you to sign off on the sale as well since all three of us are listed on certain estate documents. The closing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Let me know if you have any questions." I stared at the email, feeling multiple emotions at once. The family home, the house where I'd grown up, where my mother had lived and died, where decades of family history had unfolded, was being sold. And they were making the decision without really consulting me, just informing me and expecting me to go along with it. I researched the sale details and discovered that my father was selling the house for $1.2 million, significantly below its actual market value of closer to $1.5 million. He was accepting a quick close offer from a developer who planned to tear down the house and build a modern duplex. The rush and the below market price suggested my father wanted the sale completed fast. Maybe he had financial pressures I didn't know about. Or maybe he simply wanted to liquidate this final tie to my mother and move on. According to the estate plan, the sale proceeds would be split with Vanessa receiving the larger share and me receiving a smaller portion, maintaining the same unequal pattern. But as I looked at the numbers, an idea formed. An audacious idea, but perfectly legal. I had the financial resources to make my own offer on the house. I could purchase it myself, preserving it as I chose, preventing the developer from destroying it. The house would become mine completely, not as an inheritance, but as a property I owned outright. I called Patricia, my financial advisor, and explained the situation. She ran the numbers quickly. "You could offer the full market value of $1.5 million, she said. "That beats the developer's offer and benefits your family financially. You'd need to use your cash inheritance plus a mortgage, but your rental income more than covers the monthly payments. It's actually a sound investment. The property will appreciate, and you could rent it out or use it yourself." "But it would reveal my financial position," I said slowly. "Yes," Patricia agreed. They'd have to know you have access to significant capital, which would raise questions. I sat with that reality. Making this offer would show my hand. The secret of my property inheritance would come out, at least partially. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and start claiming my power openly. I thought about what my mother would want. Would Catherine prefer the house preserved? Or would she want me to use my resources for my own future, rather than clinging to the past? Then I thought about the email from Vanessa, the casual way she'd informed me of the decision, the assumption that I'd just go along with whatever they wanted. I made my choice. Before making any final decision, I called Vanessa directly, breaking my pattern of responding only via text or email. She sounded surprised when she answered. "Emma, is everything okay?" "I wanted to talk about the house sale," I said. "Why is Dad selling so quickly and for below market value?" "Oh, that." Vanessa's tone shifted to her usual dismissive register. "Dad wants to move forward, you know? The developer's offer is perfectly adequate, and the quick close means we can all get our money sooner. But we could get significantly more if we listed it properly," I pointed out. "Emma, real estate isn't really your area of expertise," Vanessa said with barely concealed impatience. "Dad knows what he's doing. Besides, what does it matter to you? You'll get your share regardless." There it was again. The automatic condescension, the assumption that I didn't understand, that my opinion didn't really matter. "I see," I said calmly. "Thank you for explaining." After we hung up, I made my final decision. I would make a counteroffer on the house, not to preserve it as a shrine to the past, but to take control of it on my own terms. I worked with James, my attorney, to structure the offer properly. We established an LLC for my real estate holdings, adding a layer of business formality to the transaction. The offer would come from EB Properties LLC, with me as the principal. The offer was straightforward, $1.5 million, full market value, with a quick close that matched the developer's timeline. Proof of funds attached, showing I had the capital available. I included a brief personal letter to my father, formal and businesslike. "I'm interested in preserving the family home and have the resources to do so. Please consider this offer." I didn't explain where the money came from. I didn't justify my capability. I simply presented the facts and waited. James submitted the offer directly to the estate attorney handling the sale, with copies sent to Richard and Vanessa. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was my father, calling for the first time since the memorial service. His voice was controlled, but I could hear confusion and something else underneath. Maybe suspicion, maybe fear. "Emma," he said, "I need to understand something. This offer you've submitted, where exactly did you get $1.5 million? The question hung in the air, loaded with all the assumptions he'd made about me for decades, all the ways he'd underestimated me, all the times he'd treated me as the daughter who needed guidance and rescue. I took a slow breath, feeling the power shift happening in real time. "From Mom, actually," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "She left me something you didn't know about. We should probably talk about that." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When my father finally spoke, his voice had shifted from confusion to something harder, suspicion mixed with defensiveness. "What do you mean, your mother left you something I didn't know about?" he said. "Everything was in the estate inventory. I handled all the paperwork personally." I could hear him trying to maintain his authoritative tone, the voice he used when he expected compliance and didn't want questions. "Mom owned a commercial property in downtown Portland," I explained, keeping my voice measured and precise. "She purchased it 20 years ago in her name only, using money from her parents' estate. It was never part of the marital assets. The property is worth approximately $1.8 million and generates substantial monthly rental income. It was bequeathed directly to me through the will." I delivered this information calmly, without emotion, letting the facts speak for themselves. The phone conversation became tense as my father processed what I was saying. I could practically hear his mind working, trying to understand how this was possible, how his wife had maintained a secret financial life for 2 decades. When did Catherine buy this property? He demanded. How did she afford it? Why wasn't I informed? How is this legally possible? His questions revealed both his shock and his anger at being circumvented. She used inheritance money from her parents, I explained. The property was purchased and maintained entirely separately from marital finances. Everything was completely legal and documented. Her attorney handled it all. I could hear my father's breathing change as the implications sank in. His wife had maintained a secret financial life. His daughter, the one he'd dismissed and undervalued, was now wealthier than he'd realized. The power dynamic he'd relied on for my entire life had been completely inverted. Then I heard a click, and Vanessa's voice joined the line. My father had put her on speaker. "What's going on?" Vanessa asked. "Dad, why did you put me on the phone?" "Emma apparently has inherited a property from your mother that none of us knew about," my father said, his voice tight. "What property?" Vanessa demanded. I repeated the information, hearing it sound even more substantial the second time. A commercial building worth $1.8 million, generating $12,000 in monthly rental income. Vanessa's reaction was different from my father's. She wasn't suspicious or calculating. She was indignant. "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising. "If Mom had that much money, the estate should have been divided equally. You got a building worth almost $2 million while I got jewelry worth $300,000? How is that equitable?" The entitlement in her voice was stunning, even faced with evidence that I'd received something substantial. Vanessa's immediate response was that she deserved more, that any situation where I had something valuable must be corrected. "Catherine clearly planned this," my father said, and I could hear him trying to regain control of the situation. "But it violates the spirit of fair estate distribution. Emma, if your mother had truly understood the full picture, she would have wanted the estate divided more equally." Here it was, the manipulation I'd expected. He was trying to reframe my mother's deliberate choice as a mistake or oversight, something that needed to be corrected. "I think we need to discuss this in person," my father continued. "There may be legal options for challenging the property transfer, or at minimum, you should voluntarily share a portion of the property value with Vanessa to honor your mother's true intentions." "Mom knew exactly what she was doing," I said, my voice steady. "She spent 20 years building that asset specifically to leave to me. She made a deliberate choice, and I'm honoring that choice by keeping it." Vanessa made a sound of frustration. "This is exactly why Mom never really connected with you, Emma. You're cold, you're calculating. You turn everything into a transaction instead of understanding what family means." The accusation hung in the air, and something inside me crystallized. I'd been holding back, trying to be measured and diplomatic, but Vanessa's words, the same dismissive cruelty I'd heard my entire life, pushed me past that restraint. "Mom and I were closer than you knew," I said quietly. "She wrote to me regularly over the years. She explained why she made the choices she made and why she trusted me with the truth." "What truth?" Vanessa asked. I made a decision in that moment. I was done protecting them from uncomfortable realities. "The truth about Dad's affair in the late 1990s, I said. "The truth about how he systematically moved marital assets into his name only to protect himself financially. The truth about how the two of you discussed minimizing my inheritance years before Mom died. She documented all of it, and she left it to me along with the property." The silence that followed was absolute. Then my father's voice, low and dangerous. "That's enough, Emma. We'll discuss the house sale in person. I'll have my attorney contact yours to arrange a meeting." "I agree we should meet," I said, "but it will be at my attorney's office, not yours. And we'll discuss both the house sale and the other estate matters that need to be addressed." I deliberately kept the phrasing vague, letting them wonder what other information I might have. My father agreed reluctantly, and we scheduled a meeting for 3 days later. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment, feeling the weight of what I'd just done. I'd shown my hand, revealed that I had both wealth and evidence, force them to see me as something other than the struggling daughter they'd imagined. I retrieved the safety deposit box key from my desk drawer and held it, considering whether to bring the affair evidence to the meeting. I hadn't decided yet if I'd use it, but I wanted to have the option. I wasn't vengeful, I wasn't cruel, but I was done being dismissed. Whatever happened in that meeting, I would face them as an equal, and they would finally have to see me for who I actually was. The conference room at James's office was deliberately neutral and professional: polished wood table, leather chairs, windows overlooking downtown Portland. I arrived early with James, and we spent time organizing documents and discussing strategy. "Remember," James said, "you have no legal obligation to share the property or justify your mother's choices. Everything was done properly. You're here to negotiate the house sale on your terms, nothing more." When Richard and Vanessa arrived, they were visibly taken aback by the formal setting. They'd expected a family discussion. Instead, they were walking into what felt like a business negotiation. Vanessa was dressed expensively, wearing one of our mother's necklaces, a power play that didn't escape my notice. My father wore his corporate armor, expensive suit, commanding presence, but I could see uncertainty in his eyes. James opened the meeting with professional courtesy, outlining the purpose: to discuss my offer on the family home and to clarify any questions regarding Catherine's estate distribution. He presented documentation showing the property my mother had left me: deed, purchase records, 20 years of ownership history, current valuation, rental income statements. Everything was laid out with business-like precision, making it impossible to dispute or minimize. Vanessa kept glancing at the numbers, her face tightening as she processed the full scope of what I'd inherited. My father studied the documents with forced calm, but I could see him struggling to reconcile this reality with his assumptions. The power dynamic in the room was unmistakable. I was no longer the supplicant daughter seeking approval. I was a property owner conducting business negotiations. Vanessa couldn't contain herself. She launched into an emotional attack disguised as concern, questioning our mother's mental state in her final months, suggesting the property transfer might have been made under duress or confusion, implying that I'd somehow manipulated our dying mother. James responded with calm professionalism, presenting medical records showing Catherine was mentally competent throughout her illness, documentation proving the property was purchased 2 decades ago, and the will itself, which was updated only 6 months before her death with full legal counsel present. Every point of Vanessa's attack was systematically dismantled with facts and documentation. I said nothing during this exchange, letting my attorney handle the defense, maintaining my composure while Vanessa became increasingly agitated. My father took a different approach. He acknowledged the property transfer was legal, but argued that it violated the spirit of fair estate distribution. If Catherine had truly understood the full picture, he said, she would have wanted the estate divided more equally. "Emma, you should voluntarily share a portion of the property value with Vanessa to honor your mother's true intentions." It was masterful manipulation, framing his request as about fairness and honoring Catherine, when it was really about maintaining the family hierarchy where Vanessa received more. I finally spoke, my voice steady. Mom knew exactly what she was doing. She spent 20 years building that asset specifically to leave to me. She made a deliberate choice, and I'm honoring that choice by keeping it. The conversation shifted to my offer on the family home. My father argued that selling to me would create complications. How would we handle family gatherings? What would happen if I decided to sell later? What if I wanted to make changes they didn't approve of? I responded with simple clarity. Once I own the house, these concerns become irrelevant because it will be my property to manage as I see fit. I'm offering above market value and a quick close, which benefits both of you financially. If you prefer to sell to the developer for less money because you can't tolerate me owning the family home, that's your choice. But I won't withdraw my offer or apologize for making it. The directness of my response seemed to stun them. This was not the accommodating daughter they were used to dealing with. Vanessa made a critical mistake. Frustrated by my refusal to back down, she said something cruel. You know what, Emma? This is exactly why Mom never really connected with you. You're cold, you're calculating, you turn everything into a transaction instead of understanding what family means. The words hung in the air, and I felt something crystallize inside me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, not the one with the affair evidence yet, but another one. Inside were letters my mother had written to me over the years, sent to me in Portland, full of warmth and understanding and apologies for the family. Dynamic. I slid several across the table. Mom and I were closer than you knew, I said quietly. She wrote to me regularly. She told me things she never told you. She explained why she made the choices she made and why she trusted me with the truth. My father's face changed as he recognized Catherine's handwriting. Vanessa picked up one of the letters and started reading, her expression shifting from anger to confusion to something like pain. The letters revealed Catherine's awareness of the favoritism, her regret about not standing up to Richard more forcefully, her pride in my independence and integrity. One letter explicitly stated, I know your father and sister don't see your worth, but I do, I always have. You're the daughter who inherited my strength, not my weakness. As Vanessa read, tears started falling. I realized that despite everything, my sister had genuinely believed she was the favored one, that Catherine had loved her more. Learning that our mother had seen through the family dynamic and deliberately chosen to empower me was shattering Vanessa's entire self-concept. In the heavy silence that followed, my father stood abruptly. His face was carefully controlled, but I could see emotion working beneath the surface. We need time to think about the house offer, he said. We should reconvene in a few days. As he moved toward the door, I made a decision. I'd been holding back the affair evidence, uncertain whether to use it. But watching him try to leave, try to maintain control even now, I realized he needed to understand that I had all the power in this situation. Dad, I said quietly, before you go, there's something else we should discuss. Mom left me more than property and letters. She left me information about the family history, things from the late 1990s, things I think you remember. Richard froze with his hand on the doorknob. The room went completely still. Vanessa looked between us, confused, sensing something significant she didn't understand. I continued, my voice calm but firm. We can talk about it now, or I can share it with the family in other ways. But we're going to talk about it. Richard turned slowly, his face ashen. He understood exactly what I was referring to. The power shift was complete. In that moment, watching my father's face drain of color, I understood something profound about family secrets. They only have power when everyone agrees to keep them buried. But what happens when the person who is hurt most by those secrets decides they're done protecting everyone else's comfort? What would you do if you held the truth that could shatter your family's perfect image? Would you use it, or would you let it stay hidden? The conference room felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with tension. Vanessa looked between me and our father, trying to understand what was happening. What is she talking about, Dad? Vanessa asked. What things from the 90s? Richard remained frozen by the door. Corporate composure cracking. I could see him calculating. How much did I know? How much could he deny? What was the least damaging path forward? James, my attorney, sat quietly observant, understanding this had moved beyond legal matters into family reckoning. I kept my gaze steady on my father, waiting. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. After decades of being dismissed and overlooked, I was done protecting his comfort or his image. Richard slowly returned to his seat, moving like a man approaching something dangerous. He tried first to minimize. Emma, I don't know what your mother told you, but people's memories of difficult times can become distorted. Whatever you think you know about that period, it's more complicated than... I cut him off by sliding a single photograph across the table. It was Richard with Jennifer, his former secretary, at a restaurant, clearly intimate, dated 1997. I didn't need to show everything. This one image was enough to prove I had evidence, not just accusations. Vanessa picked up the photo, stared at it, then looked at our father with dawning horror. "Dad?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "Who is this woman? Why does Emma have this?" Richard's face went through several emotions. Shock that the evidence existed, anger at Catherine for keeping it, fear of what else I might have. He tried to maintain control. "That was a very long time ago. Your mother and I worked through it. It has nothing to do with the present situation." But I wasn't letting him reframe the narrative. "The affair lasted nearly 2 years," I said calmly. "Mom discovered it but stayed for the family's sake. She documented everything because she needed insurance, proof of what she'd sacrificed." I pulled out more documents, the financial records showing how Richard had systematically moved marital assets into his name only, starting during the affair and continuing for years afterward. "He essentially embezzled from his own marriage," I explained, looking at Vanessa. "He left Mom financially vulnerable and dependent. That's why she bought the Portland property in secret. It was her escape fund, her insurance policy against a man she could no longer trust." James added legal context. "While the statute of limitations has passed for any civil action, the pattern of financial manipulation explains why Catherine structured her estate the way she did. She was protecting the daughter who valued integrity from the father who had demonstrated he would prioritize himself over family." Vanessa's world was visibly shattering. She was crying now, not delicate tears, but deep, gasping sobs. Everything she'd believed about our family, about her favored position, about our father's judgment and our mother's choices, all of it was revealed as built on lies and betrayals. She looked at the jewelry around her neck, the inheritance she'd been so proud of, and seemed to understand for the first time that it was consolation, not preference. "Why didn't she tell me?" Vanessa asked, her voice broken. "Why did she let me think I was the favorite when she was really protecting Emma?" "Because you cared about appearances," I said gently. "Mom gave you beautiful things because she knew you'd value them. She gave me the truth and the means to protect myself because she knew I cared about substance." Richard attempted to regain control by going on the offensive. He accused me of weaponizing old pain, of destroying the family for revenge, of dishonoring Catherine's memory by exposing things she chose to keep private. "Catherine stayed in the marriage by choice," he argued. "She forgave me. Dragging this up now serves no purpose except to hurt people." But I responded with devastating calm. "Mom didn't forgive you, Dad. She tolerated you. She stayed because leaving would have meant losing financial security and social standing. She made the best of a bad situation. And she made sure that I would never have to make the same compromises she did. That's why she left me the property. So I would always have the power to walk away from people who don't value me." I laid out my terms clearly. "I will purchase the family home at my offered price. The sale proceeds will be distributed exactly as the estate plan specifies. I'm not asking for more, despite having leverage to do so. In exchange, the affair evidence and financial manipulation documentation will remain private, known only to the people in this room." I paused, making sure they understood. "But if either of you ever again questions my inheritance, challenges the property transfer, or treats me as less than, I will release everything. I'll give the documentation to Aunt Linda, to Mom's friends, to anyone who ever wondered why the family dynamic was so unbalanced." I looked directly at my father. "You can accept that Mom saw me clearly and valued me appropriately, or you can deal with everyone knowing exactly what kind of man you are. Your choice." Richard sat in silence for a long moment, decades of authority and control visibly draining away. Finally, he nodded once, a small, defeated gesture. "Fine. Buy the house. Take it all." His voice was bitter. but don't expect me to celebrate your inheritance or pretend this hasn't destroyed what was left of this family." He stood and walked out without another word. Vanessa remained seated, staring at the photographs and documents scattered across the table. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Did you ever actually love us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Or were you just waiting for this moment?" I felt the weight of that question, the pain behind it. Despite everything, this moment brought no triumph, only a heavy, complicated sadness. "I loved who I thought you were," I answered honestly. "I'm still trying to figure out how to mourn the family I thought I had." In the days following the conference room confrontation, I moved through the practical necessities of purchasing the family home. The sale proceeded quickly once Richard signed the acceptance of my offer. He wanted the transaction completed and finished, wanted to move on from the property, and apparently from any connection to Catherine's memory. Vanessa didn't attend the closing. She sent a brief text. "I can't handle being there. I need time to process everything." I handled the paperwork with James's assistance, signing documents that transferred ownership of my childhood home into my name, into my LLC, making it officially mine. The moment should have felt triumphant, but instead, it felt strange and hollow. I'd won something I wasn't sure I wanted to win. After the closing, I visited the house alone. It had been cleared of most personal belongings, though some furniture remained. I walked through rooms that held decades of memories, seeing them differently now through the lens of everything I knew. The kitchen where Catherine cooked while Richard worked late during the affair years. The living room where family photos were staged to project perfection. Vanessa's childhood bedroom, larger and better positioned than mine. A physical manifestation of favoritism. My own small room at the back of the house, where I'd spent so many hours feeling invisible and wondering what was wrong with me. I stood in my mother's bedroom, the last place Catherine had lived, and tried to feel some connection to her, some sense of guidance about what to do with this space now. I spent several days considering my options. I could live in it myself, reclaiming the space on my own terms. I could rent it out, turning it into another income-generating asset. I could renovate it completely, erasing the past and creating something new. Or I could sell it, taking the profit and moving on entirely. Finally, I decided on a path that felt right. I would renovate the house thoughtfully, preserving what was beautiful about it while changing what was painful, then rent it to a family who would fill it with new memories. I'd keep ownership but create distance, allowing the space to become something beyond my family's story. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Vanessa called. Her voice was different, quieter, less certain, stripped of its usual condescension. "Can we meet for coffee?" she asked. "Just the two of us. No lawyers or fathers or agendas." I agreed, curious about what she wanted to say. We met at a neutral cafe, and for the first few minutes we sat in awkward silence. Finally, Vanessa spoke. "I've been in therapy," she said, "talking about the family, about mom and dad, about you. My therapist asked me to consider why I felt so threatened by you having something I don't have." She paused, struggling with the words. The conversation that followed was painful and honest, in ways our relationship had never been. Vanessa admitted that she'd always known, on some level, that the favoritism was unfair, but she'd benefited from it, so she never questioned it. She apologized for her cruelty at the estate, division, for dismissing my inheritance of photo albums, for all the small and large ways she'd reinforced our father's narrative that I was less important. She didn't ask for forgiveness exactly, but she acknowledged the harm she'd caused. I listened, feeling a complicated mix of validation and sadness. I appreciated the apology, but I also recognized that it didn't undo decades of damage, didn't erase the loneliness of being the overlooked daughter. I shared my own truth carefully. I explained that I wasn't interested in revenge or in destroying her, but I also couldn't pretend the past didn't happen Or that we could simply move forward as if everything was fine now. Vanessa nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. She asked one question. Do you think we can ever be real sisters? Not the roles we played in the family, but actual siblings who know and support each other? I considered this honestly. I don't know, I said, maybe, but it would take time and consistent change, not just one apology. As we were leaving the cafe, Vanessa mentioned something that caught my attention. Dad's been different since the meeting, withdrawn. He sold his condo and moved to a smaller place in Arizona. He said he needed a fresh start. I felt a flicker of concern despite everything. My father was 68, alone, apparently running from his past. Vanessa continued, her voice hesitant. He asked me not to tell you this, but I think you should know. He's been trying to contact Jennifer, the woman from the affair. I found emails on his computer when I was helping him pack. I think he's looking for some kind of redemption or closure or something. The information sat heavy between us. I realized that my father's story wasn't finished, that the consequences of exposure were still unfolding in ways I hadn't anticipated. I thanked Vanessa for telling me, and we parted with an awkward hug, both of us uncertain about what came next for our relationship or our family. Through occasional updates from Vanessa, I learned about Richard's deteriorating situation. He'd moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, into a modest condo that was a far cry from the family home he'd once presided over. He'd isolated himself from his former social circle, apparently unable to face people who'd known Catherine and might ask questions about the estate or the family. Vanessa visited him once and reported that he seemed diminished, spending his days alone, watching television, disconnected from the life he'd built. The man who once commanded boardrooms and family dinners with equal authority had become a lonely retiree running from his past. I felt a complicated mix of emotions about this. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense that consequences had finally caught up with someone who'd spent decades avoiding them. Then I received an unexpected email from an address I didn't recognize. It was from Jennifer, the woman from the affair, now in her 60s. The email was carefully worded, respectful, but direct. Jennifer explained that Richard had contacted her several months ago, seeking to reconnect, perhaps looking for some validation or rekindling of their past relationship. She'd met with him once, but quickly realized he was looking for an escape from his guilt and loneliness, not genuine connection. Jennifer wrote that she'd spent years in therapy dealing with her own guilt about the affair, understanding now that she'd been young and made terrible choices that hurt people. She told Richard she couldn't be his refuge, that he needed to face what he'd done to his family, particularly to Catherine. She was writing to me because Richard had mentioned during their meeting that his daughter had evidence of the affair and had used it to destroy the family. Jennifer's email continued with her own perspective on that period. She explained that she was 24 when the affair started, Richard's secretary, flattered by the attention of a powerful older man. She didn't think about his wife or children. She was young and selfish and believed Richard when he said his marriage was already over emotionally. When Catherine discovered the affair, Jennifer was devastated by the reality of the harm she'd caused. She left the company, moved across the country, and spent years rebuilding her life with the weight of that mistake. She married, had children, built a career in a different field. "I'm not asking for forgiveness from you," she wrote, "but I want you to know that Richard's version of the story, that he was the victim of his daughter's revenge, is false. Your mother was a remarkable woman who deserved so much better than what she got from both of us. And from what Richard told me, you inherited her strength and her integrity. I hope you use it wisely." Reading Jennifer's email, I experienced a shift in my understanding. Jennifer's willingness to own her mistakes and face the consequences stood in stark contrast to Richard's continued avoidance and victim mentality. I responded to Jennifer's email with brief gratitude, acknowledging the courage it took to reach out, and confirming that I had no interest in public revenge, only in protecting myself and honoring my mother's legacy. A few weeks later, Richard called me directly for the first time since the confrontation. His voice sounded older, tired. He didn't apologize or acknowledge the past directly. Instead, he talked around it, saying he'd been reflecting on family dynamics and reconsidering some past decisions. He mentioned that he'd been unwell, nothing serious, just the normal decline of aging, and that it had made him think about legacy and relationships. He asked, almost casually, if I would consider visiting him in Arizona, maybe bringing some of Catherine's photo albums so we could look through them together. The request was manipulative in its vulnerability, an attempt to use his age and health to create obligation. I recognized the tactic, but also heard something genuine underneath. My father was lonely and perhaps beginning to understand what he'd lost. I responded with careful honesty. I'm not interested in pretending the past didn't happen, or in providing you comfort that you haven't earned, I said. I acknowledge that you're my father, and I don't wish you harm, but I also won't sacrifice my peace to manage your guilt or loneliness. I paused, choosing my words carefully. If you want any relationship with me going forward, you need to start by taking real responsibility. Not vague reflections or indirect acknowledgments, but actual admission of what you did and how it affected Mom and me. I've built a good life. I'm financially secure and emotionally healthy. I don't need your approval or your presence. If you want to be part of my life, it will be on terms of mutual respect and honesty. Otherwise, I'm content with the distance between us. Richard's response came not as a phone call or email, but as a letter, handwritten, arriving a week later. The envelope was thick, suggesting multiple pages. I held it for a long time before opening it, understanding that whatever was inside would either be the beginning of some kind of reconciliation or the final confirmation that my father was incapable of real accountability. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my apartment with afternoon light streaming through the windows, and finally opened the envelope. The first line stopped my breath. Dear Emma, I've spent my entire life being the kind of man who never admits mistakes. Your mother tried to teach me better, but I was too proud to learn. I'm trying to learn now, but I don't know if it's too late. I continued reading, and for the first time in my life, my father's words sounded honest. The letter was 8 pages long, handwritten in Richard's precise script, and it was unlike anything I'd ever received from him. He began by acknowledging the affair directly, not minimizing or contextualizing it, just stating the fact. He'd betrayed Catherine, he'd lied for years, and he'd hurt his family through selfishness and cowardice. He wrote about how the affair started as an ego boost during a period when he felt professionally insecure, how it continued because he compartmentalized it as separate from his real life, and how Catherine's discovery forced him to confront what he'd done. He admitted that Catherine had given him a choice, end the affair and work on the marriage or leave, and he'd chosen to stay not because he loved her more than Jennifer, but because divorce would have damaged his career and reputation. Richard continued with painful honesty about the financial manipulation. He explained that after Catherine discovered the affair, he became paranoid that she would leave and take half of everything. So he systematically moved assets into accounts and investments under his name only, using his financial expertise to create a structure that would protect his wealth if the marriage ended. I made your mother financially dependent on me because I was afraid of what she might do with power, he wrote. I see now that this was another form of betrayal, perhaps worse than the affair because it was calculated and sustained over years. The most devastating section of the letter addressed the favoritism between Vanessa and me. Richard wrote that when Catherine discovered the affair, she withdrew emotionally, particularly from him. Vanessa, being older, was more visibly his ally, more eager to please him, more willing to accept his version of family life. I, younger and more perceptive, seemed to sense the tension and distance myself. I unconsciously favored Vanessa because she made me feel like a good father, he wrote, while your independence and emotional reserve reminded me of Catherine's quiet judgment. I treated you as less important because you made me feel uncomfortable with myself. You had your mother's ability to see through pretense, and I couldn't bear being seen clearly. So I dismissed you, minimized your achievements, and convinced myself that you were simply less connected to the family, rather than that I had failed you. Richard revealed something I didn't know. Catherine had told him about the Portland property 3 years before she died. She'd sat him down and explained that she'd maintained this separate asset for decades, that it would go to me, and that he had no legal claim to it. She did this, Richard wrote, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact. She wanted him to know that she'd protected herself and their daughter, that his financial manipulation hadn't left them helpless. I was furious at first, felt betrayed by the secrecy, he wrote, but Catherine was unmoved. She told me, "You made choices that prioritized yourself. I made choices that prioritized our daughter's future. We're even." That conversation changed something in me, made me realize the full extent of what I'd lost. Not just Catherine's love, but her respect, her trust, her partnership. The letter shifted to direct apology. Richard wrote that he understood I had no obligation to forgive him. The decades of dismissal and favoritism couldn't be erased by one letter. He acknowledged that he'd failed me as a father, that he'd prioritized image over substance, that he'd taught me through his actions that I wasn't valued. "You didn't destroy the family, Emma," he wrote. "I did that years ago. You simply stopped protecting me from the truth." He expressed regret, not just for the affair and the financial manipulation, but for all the small moments, the missed school events, the dismissive comments, the times he'd sided with Vanessa without hearing my perspective, the inheritance division that codified his favoritism. Richard didn't ask for reconciliation or relationship. Instead, he asked for something smaller and more specific. He wanted to know about my life. He realized he knew almost nothing about who I actually was, my work, my interests, my values, my daily life. "I don't expect you to want me in your life," he wrote, "but if you're willing to let me know you from a distance, to understand the person your mother saw clearly and I was too blind to recognize, I would be grateful for that gift." The letter ended with a postscript that caught me off guard. "Your mother left me a letter too, to be opened after her death. I only recently found the courage to read it. In it, she wrote that her greatest regret was not standing up to me more forcefully, not protecting you better from the family dynamic we created. She said that if I ever wanted to be a real father to you, I needed to earn it through honesty and consistent change, not through authority or expectation. She believed you deserved better than both of us gave you." She was right. I sat with the letter for a long time, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. My father's words sounded genuine, but I'd learned not to trust words without action. I thought about Catherine's final gift, not just the property and the evidence, but the truth, the permission to demand more, the example of how to protect yourself while still hoping for better. I didn't know yet how I'd respond to Richard's letter, or if I'd respond at all. But I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever I decided would be entirely on my terms. I took 2 weeks to consider how to respond to Richard's letter. I didn't rush the decision or let guilt pressure me into immediate forgiveness. Instead, I sat with my feelings, journaled about them, talked them through with a therapist I'd started seeing. I reflected on what I actually wanted from a relationship with my father, if anything. Did I want reconciliation? Did I want him to understand me? Did I want acknowledgement and apology? Or did I want distance and peace? Finally, I decided to respond, but carefully, with limitations and conditions that protected my emotional well-being. I wrote back to Richard, and my letter was measured and honest. I acknowledged that his letter was more honest than anything he'd shared before, and that I appreciated the apology and the recognition of harm. But I also made clear that one letter didn't undo decades of damage, and that I wasn't interested in a traditional father-daughter relationship that required me to perform forgiveness or gratitude. Instead, I proposed something limited and sustainable. We could correspond occasionally, sharing updates about our lives without expectation of deeper emotional intimacy. I'd tell him about my work, my interests, my life in Portland. He could share what he was comfortable sharing about his life in Arizona, but we wouldn't revisit the past repeatedly, wouldn't engage in cycles of apology and reassurance, and wouldn't pretend to be closer than we were. "I'm not your daughter in the traditional sense anymore," I wrote. "I'm a person you hurt who is willing to have limited contact with you if you can respect my boundaries and my autonomy. That's what I'm offering. Take it or leave it." The letter was compassionate but firm, showing that I'd learned to protect myself without being cruel. Meanwhile, my relationship with Vanessa evolved slowly and unpredictably. We met for coffee every few weeks, conversations that were sometimes awkward, sometimes surprisingly genuine. Vanessa was working through her own therapy, dealing with her identity crisis and her complicated feelings about our parents. She was more humble now, less certain of herself, asking questions rather than making pronouncements. She admitted that her marriage was struggling. Her husband was frustrated with her emotional volatility as she processed the family revelations. She was questioning everything she thought she knew about herself and her life. I listened with compassion but maintained boundaries. I wouldn't be Vanessa's therapist or emotional support system, but I was willing to be present as she did her own work. During one of our coffee meetings, Vanessa asked a question that shifted something between us. "Do you think we can ever be friends?" she asked. "Not just sisters trying to fix the past, but actual friends who choose to spend time together?" I considered this carefully. "I don't know," I said honestly. "We're very different people, and we don't have much in common beyond shared trauma, but I'm willing to find out. If we can build something new, based on who we actually are, rather than the roles we played in the family, maybe." Vanessa nodded, accepting this uncertain answer, and we began to explore what a real relationship might look like. We discovered small connections. Both loved hiking. Both were dealing with the complexity of building lives separate from parental expectations. Both were trying to figure out what family meant when the traditional structure had collapsed. I moved forward with my life and my investments. The family home renovation was completed, and I rented it to a young family with 2 children who filled the space with laughter and new memories. I visited occasionally to handle landlord responsibilities, and each time it got easier to be there, the house feeling less like a haunted space and more like simply a property I owned. My commercial building continued generating steady income, and I purchased the second residential property I'd been considering. I was building real wealth, not through inheritance alone, but through smart management and strategic decisions. I hired a property manager to handle day-to-day operations, freeing me to focus on my design work, which was thriving now that I wasn't constrained by financial stress. 6 months after the confrontation, my life had taken shape in ways I'd never imagined. I'd expanded my freelance design business, taking on bigger clients and more creative projects. I was dating someone casually, a relationship that was light and uncomplicated, based on genuine connection rather than need or obligation. I'd made friends in Portland who knew nothing about my family drama, people who valued me for who I was now rather than who I'd been or where I came from. I'd started a small scholarship fund in Catherine's name, supporting young women pursuing creative careers, a way of honoring my mother's legacy that felt meaningful. My life was full and purposeful, built on my own terms, free from the weight of family expectations and favoritism. One evening, I received an email from the estate attorney who'd handled Catherine's will. There'd been a discovery, a final letter from Catherine that was meant to be delivered 1 year after her death, held in trust by the attorney's office. The letter was addressed to both me and Vanessa, and the attorney asked if we'd like to receive it together or separately. I stared at the email, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. My mother, even in death, apparently had one more thing to say, one more piece of guidance or revelation to share. I forwarded the email to Vanessa with a simple question: together or separate? Vanessa's response came quickly. Together, I think that's what Mom would want. We scheduled a meeting at my apartment for the following week, both of us wondering what final wisdom or revelation Catherine had left for her daughters. Vanessa arrived at my apartment on a gray Saturday afternoon. We were both dressed casually, the formality of our earlier interactions replaced by something more genuine, if still uncertain. My apartment was modest, but comfortable, decorated with my own artwork and plants, a space that reflected who I was rather than what anyone expected me to be. Finally, Vanessa nodded toward the envelope. Should we just do this? I agreed, and I carefully opened the seal. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten in Catherine's elegant script. It began with an acknowledgement that if we were reading this together, something had shifted between us. My dear daughters, it started, if you're reading this as sisters rather than rivals, then perhaps I succeeded in something I failed at during my life, helping you see each other clearly. Catherine wrote that she'd always known the family dynamic was damaging, that the favoritism and competition were toxic, but she'd felt trapped by her own choices and circumstances. She explained that she'd stayed in her marriage not because she loved Richard, but because she was afraid of financial insecurity, of social judgment, of disrupting her daughters' lives. She took responsibility for her passivity, for not protecting me more forcefully, for allowing Vanessa to believe the favoritism was deserved. Catherine addressed each of us specifically. To Vanessa, she wrote, I'm sorry I let you believe that being favored meant being loved more. I'm sorry I didn't teach you that real worth comes from character, not from approval or material things. I'm sorry I let you build your identity on being the golden child, rather than helping you become your own person. To me, she wrote, I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to stand up for you the way you deserved. I'm sorry I let you feel invisible and less than. I'm sorry I chose the appearance of peace over the reality of justice. You deserved a mother who fought for you, and I gave you a mother who quietly documented wrongs instead. The apologies were specific and honest, acknowledging real failures rather than offering vague regrets. Catherine explained her strategy in the final section of her life. She wrote that once she knew she was dying, she made deliberate choices about what to leave each daughter. I didn't give you equal inheritances because you're not the same person, she wrote. I gave you what you each needed to build the life that would make you happy and whole. Vanessa needs security and beauty. Emma needs independence and truth. I gave you both what I thought would serve you best. Catherine's letter shifted to hope and guidance for the future. She wrote about her vision for our relationship, acknowledging that we might never be close, but hoping we could at least be honest with each other. The letter concluded with Catherine's final thoughts about family, forgiveness, and moving forward. After reading the letter together, Vanessa and I sat in silence for several minutes, both processing our mother's words. Finally, Vanessa spoke, her voice thick with emotion. She was right about everything. I did build my identity on being the favorite, and now that I know it was all bullshit, I don't know who I am. I reached across the table and took her sister's hand, a gesture that surprised both of us. Then figure it out, I said gently. You're 35 years old. You have time to become someone beyond what the family made you. We talked for another hour, more honestly than we ever had, acknowledging our different needs and perspectives, agreeing to stay in contact but without forcing closeness, accepting that our relationship would be what it was, rather than what anyone thought it should be. As Vanessa prepared to leave, she paused at the door. I'm glad Mom gave you the property, she said. I mean that. I was angry at first, but I understand now. You needed it more than I did. Not financially. You're clearly doing fine. But emotionally. You needed proof that you mattered, that you were seen. I already knew I mattered, even if it was for the wrong reasons. Mom was right to give us different things. I read the message several times, considering my response. Finally, I typed, Thank you. Take care of yourself, Dad. It was the first time I'd called him Dad in months, and it felt significant even if small. I didn't know what our relationship would become, if anything, but I knew I'd made peace with uncertainty. I looked around my apartment, my space, my life, built on my terms with my mother's final gift of independence and truth. I thought about Catherine's letter, about Vanessa's acknowledgement, about Richard's slow journey toward accountability. None of it was perfect or complete, but it was real. And real, I'd learned, was better than perfect ever was. 6 months later, my life had fully established its new normal. It was early spring, and Portland was blooming with cherry blossoms and rain-washed streets. My design business had grown enough that I'd hired an assistant, a recent college graduate who reminded me a bit of myself at that age, talented, uncertain, hungry for validation. I was teaching her not just about design, but about valuing her own work, charging what she's worth, building a sustainable creative career. The rental properties were running smoothly, generating steady income that gave me security and options. I was dating more seriously now, someone who knew my full story and valued me for who I was. Scarred but strong, independent but not closed off, building something new rather than running from something old. My relationship with Vanessa had settled into something sustainable. We met for coffee once a month, shared occasional texts, acknowledged each other's birthdays and major life events. We weren't best friends, but we were no longer rivals or strangers. Vanessa was rebuilding her life too, working through her marriage issues with therapy, developing interests beyond being the perfect daughter and perfect wife, slowly figuring out who she was when she wasn't performing for approval. She'd sold most of Catherine's jewelry, using the money to fund her daughter's education and her own return to school for a graduate degree. She was learning, slowly, to value substance over appearance. The sisters' relationship was honest, if limited, built on mutual respect rather than obligation or competition. I no longer carried the burden of managing his emotions or protecting him from consequences. Catherine's scholarship fund had become something meaningful. I'd funded it with a portion of my rental income, and this year we were awarding our first scholarship, $10,000, to a young woman from a low-income background pursuing graphic design. I met with the recipient, Sarah, a 19-year-old with talent and determination but limited family support. Listening to Sarah talk about her dreams and her challenges, I saw myself at that age, hungry to prove my worth, desperate for recognition, building a life despite family dynamics that didn't support me. I told Sarah about my own journey, about how I'd built my career and my security, about the importance of valuing yourself even when others don't. It was healing in an unexpected way, this opportunity to give someone else what I'd needed at that age. On the anniversary of Catherine's death, I visited her grave alone. I brought flowers and sat on the grass beside the headstone, talking to Catherine in my mind about everything that had happened. I thanked her for the property, for the truth, for the permission to demand more from life and from relationships. I also acknowledged her failures, the passivity, the years of silent suffering, the damage that could have been prevented if Catherine had been braver. I understood now that people can fail you and still love you, that you can be grateful for gifts while acknowledging the cost of how they came to you. I told Catherine about Vanessa's progress, about Richard's letters, about the scholarship recipient. I said out loud, "I think I'm okay now, Mom. I think I'm actually okay." The story concludes with me in my apartment on a quiet evening, working on a design project with my favorite music playing, rain pattering against the windows. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, a photo of her daughter's school play, with a message, "Wish you could have been here, but I know you're busy. Love you." It was casual and genuine, not loaded with expectation or manipulation. I texted back a heart emoji and a congratulations message, then returned to my work. I felt contentment, not the explosive happiness of revenge fulfilled or wrongs righted, but the quiet satisfaction of a life built on my own terms. I thought about how far I'd come from that moment in my mother's bedroom, watching Vanessa sort through jewelry while I received photo albums and dismissal. I wouldn't change the journey now, because it led me here, to independence, to truth, to peace. My sister got the jewelry, the vacation home, the appearance of being favored. I got something better. I got the truth, the tools to protect myself, and the freedom to become whoever I wanted to be. In the end, I didn't just inherit property or money. I inherited my mother's strength, her strategic patience, her ability to play the long game, and that inheritance was worth more than anything else she could have given me. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction or exposure. It's building a life so good, so authentic, so completely yours, that the people who underestimated you become irrelevant to your happiness. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the overlooked one who found your own power, I hope you'll like this video and subscribe to hear more stories like this. Because the truth is, being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you believe it. And I stopped believing it the moment I opened that envelope and discovered my mother had seen me clearly all along. Peace isn't about getting even, it's about getting free. And I'm finally completely free.